Hi, I'm Peter Capaldi. I play the Doctor, and you're watching EMS Productions.
Hello everybody, and welcome along to today's video where we reach the conclusion of my series of videos looking back over each series in the Moffat era, sort of a quick retrospective look back over each series, where today we're finishing off with Series 10. And so this is of course the final Stephen Moffat era series, Series 10, this year's series. It's amazing, it's already been nearly 3 months since the series ended. It just doesn't feel it's been that long, but it has been, the best part of 3 months since the Doctor fell. And of course I did already talk a fair amount about this series at the time, obviously with reviews of every episode and all this kind of thing, so I'm sure you may have heard some of my thoughts about it already, but I thought with this video I'd still like to do it and still kind of give more of an overview of the series, and maybe more of a look of sort of how the series is really stacking up compared to others, with a bit more perspective on the series. Now this series never really played out in the way that I think ideally the BBC had planned for it all, because essentially The Husbands of a River Song, the Christmas special at the end of Series 9, was meant to be Stephen Moffat's final episode for the show, and they wanted to, well, probably be Chris Chibnall, but bring a new showrunner in to do Series 10, probably in 2016, but having been written by a new showrunner. But then once it became apparent that Chris Chibnall wouldn't be available because of him doing the third series of Broadchurch last year, it then all became a little bit complicated, and Stephen Moffat sort of had to step in at the last minute to kind of tide the show over by doing another series for it. And that's why to a large degree sort of the end of Series 9 and The Husbands of a River Song very much does feel like an ending to an era and that side of things. It is very much closing the chapter on Clara, on River, and all these different sort of plot points are very much finished off, because it was going to be Stephen's final story and his final series, but then suddenly he had to come back and write another one, so naturally it was a bit unsure as to how good this series actually would be, given that it wasn't really something ever Stephen had actually planned to do. This also did of course mean that there did end up being a fairly significant delay between Series 9 and Series 10 of the best part of 18 months, and no series of Doctor Who in 2016, which of course caused lots of unhappiness and disappointment, shall we say, with the news that Christian was coming, but for a lot of people it was still rather frustrating. And of course there was Class, but that didn't go very well. But we reached the end of that year hiatus, if you would like to call it that, with the return of Dr. Mysterio, a nice sort of play on the idea of the Doctor returning again and using the kind of Mexican title for the Doctor that just sounds quite cool, Dr. Mysterio. But the episode itself wasn't particularly great. It was of course meant to be a sort of superhero story kind of thing, bringing in your generic superhero, saving the day with the Doctor getting a bit involved as well. And it just wasn't really my cup of tea, to be honest. I've never been a massive fan of superhero movies. I've never been that into sort of Marvel or anything like that. So it was never really likely to be something that appealed to me massively. And when I watched it, it wasn't the greatest episode in the world. I mean, I think that was pretty much the general fan opinion, that it was okay, but it felt, and that was always the problem with Stephen staying around for another series, was it felt like the show was off for ages, hopefully it was all going to freshen up and be different, and it came back and it was pretty much the same. And I think that hurt the show a bit. But there was some nice moments in the episode, and that very nice little line from the Doctor at the end about everything ends and it's always sad, but everything begins again, and that's always happy. And it's obviously retrospectively a kind of a fairly foreshadowing line, shall we say, for what would come for Peter Capaldi, where it was just a month later that he announces that he would be stepping down from the role of the 12th Doctor this Christmas, which breaks my heart slightly, because I love him so much as the Doctor. But yeah, it was just interesting looking back. It was sort of an odd line at the time, the way it was kind of almost ominous in that sense, and then we kind of found out why. Although it has to be said, we have no idea exactly when Peter informed Stephen that he was going to be stepping down from the role of the Doctor. All we know is that Jodie Whittaker auditioned in January, so certainly by January he'd confirmed it. So it was somewhere late last year as far as we can tell, but past that there is no idea as to when exactly it was. But with the slightly shaky Christmas special, we entered a full series back in spring for the first time since 2011, 2013, but having a proper full series in one run since 2010 and Series 5. So that was nice to have that back and that consistency in a nice, and what at least was thought to be a stronger ratings period for the show to air in. And with a new companion, Pearl Mackie playing Bill Potts, there was the hope there that it would be a much sort of a fresher series, a renewed series. And I think really the pilots kind of showed that it was. The return of Dr. Mysterio felt like it was still part of, not old Doctor Who, but sort of Series 9 Doctor Who, Series 8, Series 9 Doctor Who, rather than really a part of Series 10, because Series 10, with the introduction of Bill, really did just freshen up the show. It just had a new and slightly different feel to it. I said about it at the time. I know quite a lot of people talked about this. It just really felt a bit different. even just simple things like the tone of the music and the themes and everything were just slightly tweaked, and it almost felt a little bit more light-hearted than it had in Series 9, which was certainly one of the more darker series of the show, and really that kind of darker Doctor that we got through Series 8 in particular, and parts of Series 9. And just having a fresh companion with a fresh take on the show, I think, was really important for the show at this stage, because it had been a very, very long time since we had a companion introduction, with Jenna Coleman and Clara sticking around for 3 years. It was sort of a very long time without having a companion introduction and having a new companion finding out about the world of the Doctor and what he does and everything. So I think that was really good for the show. And it was wonderful for us to watch Peter Capaldi's Doctor as well, doing the whole sort of welcoming the new companion into the TARDIS, showing it off and everything like that. Those sort of just the brilliant iconic scenes you always want to see each Doctor get its opportunity. It took Peter a couple of series to get there, but he got it in the end, and it was brilliant. And so that first episode, the pilot, was very much about setting up the characters and the relationship between the Doctor and Bill, more than really the plot of the episode. I mean, it did, of course, have a little bit more relevance by the end of the series, what was going on with Heather and all this becoming the pilot and everything. But at the time, it felt like a fairly... the plot wasn't really important. They sort of went all over the place a little bit, but it was all about the Doctor and Bill getting to know each other. And I think they really did form a very strong relationship sort of early on in those first few episodes. Certainly Smile developed that very well as well, when the first kind of 20-25 minutes were pretty much just the Doctor and Bill wandering around this mysterious, futuristic place trying to understand what's going on, and it gave a great opportunity for them to kind of have a bit of just chatter and discussion and really build up their relationship, and I think that really kind of benefited them in the long run, certainly. Even if maybe as a whole those next couple of episodes, 3 episodes, weren't the strongest, at least in my opinion. Certainly Smile was nothing special. It was very much a sort of run-of-the-mill story. It was a nice bit of character development, but past that there wasn't too much going on. Then Thin Ice was quite good. I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it more than Smile. It was a nice sort of idea, where I think that Sarah Dodd brought in about, well, the monster under the Thames, but it not really being a monster at all and that sort of things. It was actually the humans that are really the nasty people, shall we say, and of course the Doctor punching a racist is always quite nice, among other things. And then following that we had Knock Knock as well, which was another sort of strong standalone story. It wasn't one of my favourites. I know somebody who said it was their favourite episode of the series, and I can kind of understand why. If that kind of horror story, haunted house kind of thing is very much up your street, then maybe you'd enjoy it a little bit more, but it is, to me, just a bit of sort of bog standard Doctor Who. And that's probably one of the main sort of letdowns of parts of this series, is it kind of, to some degree, fell into the trap of what we had in Series 8 and Series 7, where there were a lot of standalone stories, and everything almost feels a little bit insignificant at times. It's nice to have lots of sort of romps and that kind of thing, but I also feel it's good to have slightly more extended and bigger event stories, if that's something to call them, and a stronger arc through the series, which there just didn't seem to really be a huge amount of in this series. I mean, there was the Vault mystery that was set up for the first half of the series, but it was very much a kind of, we knew it was missing pretty much straight away, and Stephen basically acknowledged that, didn't try to shock us massively. Kind of, he talks it up in the interviews, but in the actual episodes, by the time it was revealed, it was just sort of revealed. It wasn't a big build-up, because it was kind of obvious. It was always going to be Missy, sort of thing. So following those first 4 episodes, we kind of get into what is to some degree a 4-part arc, more of a 3-part arc for the next 3 episodes, but certainly this one kind of sets in motion some of it and links into the rest of it, because of course the Doctor becomes blind in it. And I think Oxygen is a very strong story as far as I'm concerned. It's a really enjoyable base under siege story. It really brings back in the kind of danger of space and kind of making that a bit more real, because sometimes we've seen, shall we say, unrealistic space scenes where in reality somebody would actually die, but they're absolutely fine, just floating around in space, something like that. Peter Davison, way back in the 80s and stuff, was not the best. So it was nice to give that element of danger back, and obviously having consequences with the Doctor becoming blind as well. And it was nice to just have something that had never happened to the Doctor before. He'd never been blind, he'd never been not able to see. It was just, there's not too many things completely new you can do with the Doctor as a character, but to take away his eyesight for a couple of episodes was a really good idea, I think, and something that, we just haven't seen before. So it was at least a great opportunity, it seemed at the time. So following that, it leads straight into Extremis, which is still one of my favourite episodes of the series, actually. I really, really enjoy this episode by Stephen Moffat, the kind of building up and understanding exactly what's going on. It has a similar element to Heaven Sent on that sort of things, where it's all a bit mysterious, you don't quite understand what's going on, and by the end of it, it's kind of gradually revealed exactly what's going on. It's all a simulation by the aliens to kind of simulate an invasion and find out the humans' weaknesses and exactly how it all will play out. And it's a great idea that I don't... Well, I'm sure somebody has said to me that it was done in Doctor Who before, and I'm going to be a complete idiot and say I can't remember when it was done in Doctor Who before. Do tell me, because I'm sure it has been, but it still was a really good idea by Stephen to introduce and kind of set up a 3-part arc, but this is very much a standalone story as well. It sets up what's going to happen, but it can be completely detached from what's going to happen in the future as well, even if it does end in a slightly sort of cliffhanger-y ending. So I know it was very, very mixed opinions from this story at the time. There were some people praising it, and some people who maybe don't like this type of storytelling so much, which kind of like, well, that was boring, that was rubbish kind of thing, and that's fair enough. But personally, I really enjoyed this story. But unfortunately, from there, pretty much the Monk trilogy goes downhill. The pyramid at the end of the world, it's a solid mid part of the 3-parter. It kind of obviously sets up the invasion. We find out a little bit more and understand a little bit more about the monks and exactly what's going on with them and what they do, sort of thing. And then we end up with the invasion at the end of it. But we don't see an invasion, it's just kind of set up in that episode and then happened by the time we get to the Lie of the Land. So there was never that element of seeing the alien invasion, which is always just something quite nice to see, lots of explosions and CGI and all that kind of thing. And that's where the kind of 3-part continued to kind of fall, was of course the monks. We just knew nothing about them, and they just disappeared at the end when they lost. We never knew why they wanted to invade, what they wanted to do, where they were from, why. Yeah, there was nothing. We learned nothing about them. I think that was a weak point of it, and potentially was down to having 3 different writers for a 3-part story. Maybe there just wasn't enough communication, and so by episode 3, Toby Whithouse, who writes the 3rd part, is just thinking, well, I'm sure they'll have explained behind what's going on with him and what's going on with the monks and who are they, why are they here, kind of thing. I'm sure that'll be explained previously, so I don't need to worry about it. Because essentially the monks don't get a single line of dialogue in the 3rd part, so they're just kind of forgotten about by the end of it, which does let it down, and the conclusion to it isn't the greatest as well, with Bill saving the world via love, which has been done a few times in Doctor Who, and it's nice. But it felt like a slightly underwhelming conclusion to the 3 parts. It just kind of fizzled out with, Bill remembering her mum, the love of her mum, and it defeated everything, and that was it. Of course, with moments like the Doctor's fake regeneration as well, which was just a complete trailer grab and a waste of time, among other things. And it was just a kind of disappointment, I think, through the middle of the series, because there was a lot invested in having 3 episodes strongly linked to each other and all one story. To then kind of have it fizzle out so badly, really, was very disappointing. Because I remember at the time it was very much the sort of 3-parter was one of the things I was looking forward to most about Series 10. I was really sort of the idea of having 3 different writers, a big 3-part story, lots of kind of high stakes and everything. It sounded brilliant in a concept, but in reality, once you got past episode 1, it just didn't really happen. We did also see Missy introduced back into the show again in this 3-part arc, and she was very much the arc of the series, about her essentially turning good. And it was an interesting arc to explore because of. And that is, of course, the really interesting kind of moral dilemma of the Master or Missy as to whether he/she is really good or really that bad at all. It's always sort of a little bit unknown, because she seems to kind of want to kill the Doctor sometimes, and then other times doesn't, or doesn't seem that bit disappointed when he/she doesn't defeat the Doctor, shall we say. So it was nice to kind of build that up and follow it, and for Missy to kind of start to understand exactly kind of how bad it feels to kill people and all this kind of thing, and it's really nicely resolved as well in the following, which I'll get onto soon. Now, after that 3-part arc of the Monk trilogy, we of course have a couple of kind of standalone and fairly inconsequential episodes of Empress of Mars by Mark Gatiss. It's just a pretty bog standard Ice Warrior story written by Mark Gatiss. You're not going to expect much anyway. And there's a Knife at Alsa Centauri cameo, but that's pretty much the only thing that's memorable about this episode as far as I'm concerned, unfortunately. And pretty much the same can be said for the Eaters of Light as well, I'm afraid. It's nice to have a classic writer writing an episode for the New Who again, with Rona Munro coming back from Survival to write the Eaters of Light, but it's just not really my kind of story. I'm not interested in that sort of history stuff so much. And it's just kind of, it doesn't really get us anywhere. It's just a sort of standalone story. It's okay, but there's just really nothing special to say about it at all, unfortunately. But then things rather start to kick into gear as we get to the series finale with World Enough and Time and the Doctor Falls, and wow, it is a spectacular finale. The ingredients were very much there when we heard we were going to have the Johnson Master returning, Mondasian Cybermen returning, you're going to be Missy involved with it as well, as along with the three crew TARDIS team there as well. And then we've seen Bill getting kills, and through different types of Cybermen and everything, and it's just an absolutely brilliant sort of story overall. And I think one of the best things about this finale as well is that the second part is actually good. So often the problem has been with New Who finales, whether it be written by RTD or by Stephen Moffat, it's always been a brilliant first part generally, with a brilliant setup, an interesting plot, a great idea, a brilliant cliffhanger. It's all set up perfectly. And then you get to part 2 and it's almost like the writers didn't know how to close it down and how to resolve it all. And then it either goes in a direction you're not really expecting or wanting, or it's just got a rubbish conclusion and a rubbish resolution. And it always just feels a bit unsatisfying fairly often with New Who finales. So it was really nice that, at least in my opinion, the Doctor Falls is a better episode of Well Enough in Time and really does wrap up every single element perfectly. Definitely my appreciation for this finale has grown since the series aired. I did enjoy both these parts of the story at the time, but in sort of the 3 months since, having watched them a couple more times, I've sort of really just kind of found even more enjoyment from them and found some of the scenes in it so absolutely brilliant. I mean, all the stuff with the sort of John Simmon is phenomenal. His brilliant kind of disguise throughout the first episode, although it's a little bit frustrating because kind of the mystery's already been spoiled and you know it's him basically straight away. It's still a sort of really, if we didn't know, it'd be absolutely legendary because it is a great disguise and it's brilliantly played with Bill right through until that sort of shocking conclusion for it. And the reveal of the Johnson Master as well is absolutely fantastic, when he rips that mask off as if a classic 1970s, 1980s disguise is torn away and the Master appears right in front of Missy. It's just such a brilliant moment. And then that final shot at the end of the episode when you've got sort of Missy, the Master, and then Bill as the Mondasian Cybermen stood all together in front of the Doctor in absolute horror about it all. It's just brilliantly set up really for a second part, which then actually does play out brilliantly. So yes, I think the second part, The Doctor Falls, is probably one of the strongest kind of final episodes of the series that we've had in a very long time. It's just got some brilliant character scenes between certainly the Doctor and Bill, then some of the speech the Doctor gives to the two Masters later on, some of the dialogue between the Master and Missy. And that's always what a Stephen Moffat phenomenon has been a little bit more about. So, I mean, looking back over these few videos I've done, it's always been more character driven, whereas RTD was all big alien invasions, massive explosions, excitement and all this kind of thing. With Moffat, often his finales have been a bit more sort of a quieter affair, more underplayed, and a lot more about the characters and their relationships and the dialogue between them. And I think it's nice to have that sort of difference between the eras of the show. And I think this episode was where Moffat really just got it right. There was still a reasonably interesting plot there with the three types of Cybermen trying to come up to destroy each of the levels of this sort of spaceship. I mean, that whole concept of that spaceship that's stuck halfway inside a black hole and therefore part of it runs faster in time than the other end of the ship is a really great idea that hadn't been done before in Doctor Who. And it's just a really good plot that's sort of explored throughout the two parts. And then of course you sort of feel it's all coming to a conclusion with the 12th Doctor as well. As we don't really know at the time whether the Doctor's really going to regenerate or not in this episode, it does kind of feel like you're getting to that stage. And he's very much kind of, he knows he's at the end in that side of things, and he's sort of with that line, without hope, without witness, without reward. Just kind of thinking and understanding that it's just kind of like the Doctor's the most kind of selfless person and that side of things, that he'll, even though there is no hope, and he's going to get nothing out of this, he's going to die, he's still going to go and save them. He's going to do everything he can to save just a few people in this spaceship in the middle of nowhere, miles away from anything. He's still going to go and save them. That's because that's what he stands for, that's what he is. He'll give everything to just save a few people if he can, because he's that sort of person. And I think that's a great message that really comes across very well in this finale. I think it really works very well having the two Masters as well in this finale. There's some brilliant scenes between Michelle Gomez and John Simmons, the two Masters, and I think it really works very well in the arc of the series with Missy, and it kind of almost lets her see a reflection of what she used to be like, and really that she doesn't want to be like that anymore. And she makes that decision at the sort of towards the end of the episode that she's going to turn good, she's going to go and join the Doctor. But the Doctor's never going to know, because of course they fittingly stabbed each other in the back and killed each other. As would only be the way, really, that they'd be so self-destructed to kill each other, kill themselves. It was always to be expected when two Masters joined together, really. But it was a sort of a really heartbreaking and sad end. It's kind of a weird feeling that you feel really sad for essentially what's been a villain in a large amount of stories, but you really do feel for Missy, certainly, because she has turned good. She's really understand all the bad things, but I'm sure when the new incarnation of the Master comes back in however many years' time, I'm sure they'll be back up to their evil and sort of machinating ways. And so finally, probably just talking about the conclusion to this story, which I think it's a really nicely played. Those sort of last 10-15 minutes when the Doctor's, well, his brilliant sort of final glorious moment, as it were, of sapping all those Cybermen away. I mean, there is a little bit of the sense of how can a sonic screwdriver blow up loads of Cybermen, but it's such a brilliantly played sort of action scene, one of the Doctor's greatest moments kind of thing, as he's going around shooting all these different Cybermen, quoting all their different invasions and everything, and saying, "I defeat you every single time." And then he gets zapped by a Mondasian Cybermen, blows up the whole planet, or the whole area, and that seems to be the end of it, as he's lying dying on a battlefield. And builds a Cyberman, so it's all going rather badly. But then of course Heather appears, we have the link back to episode 1, which all makes sense in the end. That's something I quite like, that Stephen kind of told us it in the first episode, but we didn't realise it at the time. And then you can go back now and watch it and kind of understand that was the link, that Heather was always kind of there watching, ready to come and help when she really needed it, when Bill really needed it. And it's a really nice conclusion, I think, for Bill. It is mirroring to some degree how Clara's exit, where she is essentially immortal, can fly off the ground of the universe and all that kind of thing. But I think it still worked out very well. You could have kept her as a Cyberman, but I think it feels generally like people were more accepting of this ending than they were of Clara, even though it was a very similar ending. But of course Bill's story is not quite over yet, as we're going to see her this Christmas for at least somewhat as well. And then those final few minutes in the TARDIS with the Doctor are just probably one of my favourite sort of scenes in the show's history, really. I just absolutely love that kind of... Well, there's so many... It's just a continuity reference scene, basically, with every single continuity reference you could possibly cram into 5 minutes of the Doctor, basically, with the whole... all the old companions appearing and shouting Doctor. I mean, it would be nice to have a couple of classic Who ones in there or something as well. And of course Clara in there as well, which is quite significant. Then quoting the various different Doctors as they're regenerating, when the Doctor was me, I don't want to go, it started, I'm regenerating. All these different sort of references to it were just brilliantly done there. And then the Doctor just not wanting to die. He's done it so many times over and over again. He just doesn't want to change again, become another person all over again. And I think that kind of, it fits quite well in with his character. He's gone through so much, he's lost this companion, he's kind of fought to the death on that side of things, and he's just like, he just kind of almost just prefer to die, I think, than regenerate at this stage. He just doesn't want to change anymore. He's had enough of being someone else. And the final perfect ending of the series is the First Doctor appearing again in Doctor Who after 50 odd years, turning up to face off with the 12th Doctor on on the Moon even, in 1986 or 5, whenever the 10th planet is set. And we're braced for a 2 Doctors Christmas with links to the 10th planet and Bill turning up and all this. It looks like a brilliant sort of Christmas special and a final last hurrah for Peter Capaldi's Doctor. But it was just a fantastic ending to the series, I think, and just a really strong story overall. So looking back at the series as a whole, I think it was more of a mixed series, I think, in my opinion at least, than Series 9. It's not my favourite series of the show. It's got some very strong episodes. As I say, I really enjoy the finale. I really like the pilot's also really good. I like Oxygen as well, but apart from that, there's just the rest of them just aren't that great. Smile, I'm not fussed about. Knock Knock, no thanks. Empress of Mars and the Eaters of Light, not really fussed. I quite like Thin Ice. The Monk trilogy struggles its way to its conclusion as well, so it's a very kind of, although a lot of people have said it's a more consistent series, and I think there's not any absolute clangers like there was with Sleep No More or In the Forest of the Night or something like that, but there wasn't that many high points, I don't think, in the same way that we had in Series 9, at least for me personally. I know, of course, reading your comments on the previous video, a lot of people disagree with me, and that's fair enough. Probably a lot of you like Series 10 more, but for me personally, I still prefer Series 9. And one of the best part of half an hour of recording, the one person I have not managed to mention so far, so I will give him one quick mention, is Nodal, of course, played by Matt Lucas. Everybody thought he was going to be a disaster. He was actually really good. He didn't have much to do in the first few episodes because he was clearly a very late addition and hasn't been written into the scripts. They tried to kind of slot him in where they could. But once we got to those scripts later on in the series, he became more of an integral part of the team, and it was nice that we actually felt sad about seeing him leaving in episode 12. I think that tended to be the general fan opinion, that it was quite a sad moment to see him Nardole leave, because we really had to come to kind of like him and warm to him as a companion, because he became a bit more than just a pointless comedy character that he was, because he was written to be that initially. That was all he was. So it was a bit of a random choice to bring him in, but I think overall he worked very well in the series. And well, there you go, guys. That is the Steven Moffat era. We've looked back at every single series over the last few weeks, trying to kind of look back at what worked and what didn't throughout the Steven Moffat era. I know that this era as a whole will always, I'm sure, be a fairly divisive era. I think probably more so than the Russell T Davies era, just because Steven's done some more controversial things, I think, in the show's history. Compared to RTD's had a longer period of it as well, so there's a lot more episodes to kind of scrutinise on that side of things. I think that time will probably be kinder to the Steven Moffat era than maybe it is now, and I think in 5-10 years' time we'll look back on this 7 years of the show and look on it more favourably than maybe we do at times now. Certainly I know there's still a lot of positivity about like Series 5 and something like that, but I think sort of maybe, I think the Capaldi era certainly I think is a kind of underrated era, and I think, yeah, in a few years' time there'll be a lot more positive feeling about it. But thank you very much, guys, for coming on my ride through each of the Moffat era series. It's been nice to have a little look back, a reminder of each of the episodes, and some of the great ones and some of the not so good ones. But do let me know, guys, your thoughts on Series 10 as a whole. What are your favourite episodes of Series 10? I'm sure the finale's in there, but what other ones did you really enjoy as well? And do just let me know, sort of, overall, what are some of your favourites of the Moffat era, your favourite stories, your favourite series maybe, and just kind of maybe just a few sort of random thoughts and a few ideas maybe that you really liked, and ideas that Steven really brought to the show that we've never really seen before. So do just, yeah, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. But other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching this video. Remember to like it, subscribe if you're new here, and I will see you again very, very soon for another video. Goodbye.